Hey friend, Niklas here from Your Audio Solutions. Hope you're doing well and welcome to this week's show. On the show this week we have Leland Sklar, the legendary bass player, has done thousands of recordings and has played with legendary artists such as James Taylor, Phil Collins, Carole King, Toto, and the list goes on and on. It was a real pleasure having Lee on the show, and I hope you're gonna like it too. Lee also has a very popular YouTube channel where he tells stories from recording sessions and tours, and he also plays his bass parts on tracks, for example, like Ssudio and Another Day in Paradise by Phil Collins. With his experience having been in the industry since the 60s, it was a real pleasure talking to him. He's a great musician, great guy, and an awesome bass player. So I really hope you're going to like this interview as much as I like talking to Lee. Before we get into the interview with Lee, I want to tell you about some exclusive access you can get if you join the email list. So if you just click the link below, you can join the email list and get exclusive access to interviews before the public. It's free to join. Just hit the link, enter your name, and you're on the exclusive list. It's very easy, and I would love to see you join. But that's it. With promotion, let's get into the interview with Leland Sklar. So how have you been in this quarantine?
Well, it's one of these things that I had a really busy year lined up, and in a moment, my year turned into zero. So it's frustrating. I was supposed to come over and do the bass show in Manchester earlier this year, and I had a thing to do in Zurich and another big thing in Germany coming up, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's, some stuff may get rescheduled for later in the year or early next year, but the way people are acting right now, like it's all over, they're starting to get way too close and not doing protection. So my gut tells me there's going to be a huge surge of this later on. It could really screw up the whole schedule of getting back to whatever normal is. So I'm just, like I said, we're doing a bunch of stuff with our band, and I'm doing stuff with Judith Owen. We're doing a lot of a cappella videos, and then I started a YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. That was a good thing. People are loving it.
It's like it's really shocking how it took off to me, because people that I know on YouTube go, Jesus, it's like I've been working at it a year and I finally got 1,000 subscriptions, and in 7 weeks I hit like 104,000. So who, some old fart sideman bass player would
I mean, to be honest, your stories are awesome, and I think that's why people resonate with your stuff.
I'm going to keep it up. In fact, I was sitting here just now getting ready to do after we finish, I'll do my video for today, and I'm just going to talk about all the drummers
cool.
and then I'm going to do I'm going to show when we did the Falling in Between tour with Toto. I'm going to show Simon's solo in it. Was unbelievable. I mean, he's like such a monster. And I thought, rather than me playing something, I'm just going to show with this, and the challenge that we had trying to keep the thing going while he's twisting time all over. It was great. So, I'm just, going through all kinds of stuff, trying to figure out, what would be interesting. But once things are back to normal, I'm going to take it on the road. I'm going to film at gigs and interview people and have that up and edit. And we're getting ready to start like a clubhouse, and we're doing live streaming and inviting people in. And so, looking for things to do to keep viable in a really altered universe.
Yeah, exactly.
It's strange. It's bizarre.
It is strange. And I hope it's going to change, for all of us involved in music.
Please.
It's just time will tell, I guess, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hard part of it is the uncertainty of the future is what's really kind of frustrating. But primarily the most important thing is be alive.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm seeing too many people out there just being incredibly stupid. And And it's one thing, I mean, if somebody's going to be stupid and they're going to pay the price, so be it. But the fact that, they might be out just partying, having a good time, come home and their grandparents are at the house, or they got like a little sister with, severe asthma.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing you know, you're watching their funeral on Zoom because you can't go to the funeral kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just things that, 4 months ago, none of this stuff was in our vernacular.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm sure social distancing will be in the next Webster's dictionary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy, man. It's the thing is, there's not much to say really, because we're just on a waiting game,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, try to be positive, I guess, and hopefully.
Well, if you can't be, then it's really a kind of a defeatist attitude. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of really stupid stuff going on, but at the end of the day, you just hope people will be relatively smart and do the right thing. But like here, it's been really hard, and I know it's been global, but certainly with the Black Lives movement and all the marches, and you see, 10,000 people shoulder to shoulder. There's going to be some ramification from that proximity.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see. So if you want, whatever you want to talk about, or unless we've already started.
Yeah, we can say we started. It doesn't, it's a bit rough around the edges, which I like.
I love that.
Cool. But yeah, actually, let's start with the questions. Actually, I mean, you've been in so many interviews. There's been so much to learn about you, which has been awesome. And I know you studied piano before you started playing bass. But I still like to go back to the beginning a bit and ask you who inspired you to start studying music at the first place.
Well, there was a pianist who was a renowned pianist named Liberace, who had a TV show, and then he became like, he was Elton before Elton ever went for it. I mean, he was out with his, driving the Rolls Royce on stage and coming out and all this sort. But at the end of the day, he was really a fine concert pianist. And my parents used to watch his TV show when I was like 4 years old. And I would sit kind of looking around the corner where I was supposed to be in bed sleeping. And I was like, sneak in and watch this show. And I fell in love with it. I just, his kind of panache, as he sat at the piano in his tuxedo and all his big rings, and he had a candelabra, and his brother George would come out and play violin. And he was a great entertainer, and I was kind of enamored with it. And we had a baby grand piano in the house.
Right.
My mother played a little bit, but it was a family heirloom. And I started plunking at it and showed an interest. So my parents hired a music teacher for me, piano teacher. And I took to it immediately. And by the time I was 8 years old, I had won, like the Hollywood Bowl Association had an annual award for like the outstanding young pianist in Los Angeles. And I won it that year. And
cool.
I met Eugene Normandy, who was the conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra, one of the great conductors in history. But I was a complete classical snob. All I did was, it would kind of, I ended up sort of going nuts under stress because I think what ultimately in hindsight, when I look back, my piano teacher was living out whatever success she didn't have through me.
Right.
And she was, constantly telling my parents that he's unbelievable. This is like the best student I've ever had. And so I was doing all these recitals and, having to memorize all these pieces. And by the time I was 12, I was burned out with it. And I went into junior high school assuming I would be like the piano player in the orchestra. And the music teacher, whose name was Ted Lynn, he said, look, we got a pile of kids that play piano. We need a string bass player. And he pulled out an old K upright from a back room and just set it in my arms and showed me how to hold it. And I plucked it like a low E and felt that vibration run through me. And I looked at him, I said, fine, I'll do it.
Right.
And he took me aside for, a while and gave me he was a violinist. So he gave me pretty good rudimentary training on the upright. and at that point, I kind of just left piano. I was really done with it, and I've hardly ever played it since. I think it just, and I ended up with a couple of teachers that were very good towards the end. In fact, one of the really great L.A. drummers throughout my whole career was Ed Green, and we were talking one day, and it turns out his mother was my last piano teacher, Debbie Green,
Right.
and it was just funny, I'm looking at him going, we've been working all these years. I had no clue that your mom was my piano teacher. And he was probably in the house when I was in the garage getting my lessons from her.
Right.
So it's a funny world how all these things can come together. But at that point, I ended up getting an upright teacher and studied with him. And then later on ended up with a teacher named Nat Gangursky. And Nat taught some of the greatest bass players in the world. I mean, he lived in LA, and he was a staple of the LA movie scene. He was like one of the main call guys for upright bass for theatrical productions and stuff. But my problem was when I started my gig, like when I really actually kind of launched in late 69, 70, nobody wanted upright on anything. Everything was electric.
Sure, yeah.
And so during a course of time, my chops just kind of went down. I mean, I still have a bass, but my chops just kind of diminished. And when finally, it took like 20 years before people started saying, can you double on these dates and do upright? And I said, John Patitucci lives here. Chuck DeMonico lives here. Call them for the upright parts, because I really didn't have, because of my schedule, the time to really get back into it and be as good as I would have needed to be to do these gigs.
Right.
But I skipped one portion of this. When I started playing bass in junior high school, I started joining bands and stuff, but I really struggled with it because I was playing against electric guitars and drums, and all I had was, they would let me use the string bass from school. So finally, my father took me and we bought an electric bass and an amp, and that kind of was a big game changer for me. I suddenly was a contender.
Yeah. So what was your first bass?
It was a Melody bass and a St. George amp.
Wow.
They were both real cheap Japanese things.
I never heard about them, actually.
And they probably were good for about a year and then went out of business or something.
Right.
But and then I built like an amp. I went and got a cabinet and bought a JBL 15-inch speaker, put it in it, and bought an old Bogan hi-fi amp.
Wow.
And it was great. I used to do these gigs where we would back like the Drifters, and there was probably 10 different incarnations of the Drifters touring around the country.
Right.
And so this one incarnation of them came, and we did a gig at one of the colleges out here. And right in the middle of the set, I looked back and my amp had gone up in flames.
Wow.
There was fire pouring out through the grill on it and stuff. So, so I went through stuff. I got a Standell Super Imperial amp, and finally ended up with an SVT with 1610s, which is still, for rock and roll, it's pretty hard to beat one of those suckers.
Exactly.
And then finally got a real bass. I got a deal on a 62 jazz bass for $90.
Wow.
And that's sitting in the corner here right now. And it's the bass I used on James Taylor's stuff on Spectrum.
Awesome.
It's still.
Yeah, actually, because I started out playing a bass as well, and the first bass I got, unfortunately, I tried to be, I guess, cool, so I smashed it on the pavement for no reason, which is a shame, to be honest. It would have been fun to have it still, but yeah, that's what I did. But so when you did start,
what was it? What kind? Do you remember?
No, it was a cheap knockoff of something. I don't know. Yeah. The standard.
I mean, I had Echo bass, and it was a knockoff of a Hofner.
Right.
Yeah. It was really kind of not a good bass.
Right. But it was good to start out on, I guess.
Yeah. That's great.
But so who then inspired you when you did start playing bass? Like, did you have any? Because I imagine that must have been in the 50s or.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was really, when I started playing upright, I was leaning in towards like a jazz area. I was put in the jazz band in junior high school and all. And I started listening, and then I was, got turned on to like Ray Brown and Charlie Mingus and Red
Right.
Callender. I mean, there were like all these. I was not into rock and roll. I wasn't an Elvis guy or anything like that. It really wasn't until the Beatles happened that it turned my head around when I heard McCartney play. And not only McCartney, though, but so many of the groups that came over from England
Right.
of that period, from the Stones to Freddie and the Dreamers to Jerry and the Pacemakers. It was all these groups. And the bass parts were really interesting, and the Kinks, the Zombies, all those bands. So that really, for me, was kind of a game changer. It really turned my head around as far as what bass could do. And so I started joining bands because everybody was trying to, emulate the music of that period.
Right.
And ended up just kind of creating myself out of just enjoying listening to the way those guys approach things. Because it's really amazing when you look at how all those groups were really pretty young guys in them, how mature most of that writing really was in terms of structure of the songs and changes and the parts. So I think it was an incredibly fertile ground. And then, but like in 1967, I was in a band, and when we went in the studio, we weren't allowed to play on our record. The Wrecking Crew played on our record.
Right.
So looking in a window at Carole King and Hal Blaine and all these people, and that completely turned my head around too. And so I mean, it's been a journey of like all kinds of weird little side steps that eventually ended up where I ended up. But during that period, I can't say anybody was a major influence on me. I think the general climate was the influence on me, because I was kind of gleaning something from everybody I was listening to.
Right. I mean, I don't know if because obviously you lived in that time period, but like people like me and slightly older people than me, we tend to romanticize the LA of the 60s, 70s, whatever.
Yeah.
Was it as good as we think?
It was better.
In which way?
I'm first off, especially up till around 1968, where things in LA got crazy, where they had like the riots on the Sunset Strip, and it was all this stuff. There were so many clubs. There was so much music being made that, I mean, I would go into clubs and I'd see Jimi Hendrix and I'd see The Who and I'd see Chicago and all these people in their really early years. When I was in college, Cream played in the gymnasium.
Wow, yeah.
They're watching, Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton 20 feet away from me on a stage set up in the gym. So it was such fertile ground for so much activity. And the thing that was great about it was when things really got going, like with the whole Laurel Canyon scene, when our careers really started, it was a very giving, sharing community. You'd go into like Westwood Music was the big music store in LA at that point, and you go in there and there's Jackson Browne and Ry Cooder and all these guys are sitting around trying out instruments and jamming. You'd go to somebody's house and there would be all the players would be just hanging out. Nobody was like possessive about their scene. Everybody was, especially singers were singing on everybody else's records.
Right.
You be in the studio and it was like a real family energy here. And there was so much work to go that everybody was sharing. It's not like you were coveting the few gigs that came through the door.
Right.
And it was magic. It was just but it was magic in a way that you didn't realize it was. It's only the historical looking back on it that makes it seem that. But when you're living in the moment, you're just kind of there. You're not really thinking about what the future is going to say about this.
Exactly. I mean, it's fascinating because you mentioned it, where like bands like the Beatles, they were so young when they wrote all these awesome songs, which is mind blowing.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did it and how they came up with that stuff at that age.
Well, you look at somebody, like Steve Winwood
Hmm.
was like one of the major vocalists on the scene when he was 17 years old.
Wow. Wow.
When he was in Spencer Davis group and doing "You Got Me Running" and those songs, he was a teenager, and his B3 playing was like ridiculous.
Right.
So you were looking at a kind of an incredible maturity
Hmm.
for these young people, because over the years, like, people would hear somebody like, playing, and they go, yeah, he's like 28, but he's got potential. And I'm thinking, God, there were these people that were 20
Yeah.
that were full blown. So I don't know, but age is it is just what it is. It's some people didn't venture into music until they were in their 40s and made major statements. So it's really what you've got going on within you. Sorry, it's only going to ring twice and then it'll go. It's
Sure.
I get these damn robocalls all day long.
No worries.
But I mean, that to me is the fascinating part of music, is that there's the diversity of how everybody comes to it, what they listen to, how it affects them in all their relationships, and so it's just an absolutely unique process.
Exactly.
And
I mean, do you think, because, I mean, like yourself, you came from classical background, and I guess a lot of the guys, when you came up, did come from a classical-ish background.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that helped the quality of the writing.
Probably.
Right.
I mean, it certainly opened your ears to. I mean, if you came up listening to classical music or you came up listening to the blues, it's going to be a very different mindset on you, and it's neither good nor bad. But the thing that classical brought to it was, first off, it gave me the ability to read music.
Mm-hmm.
So when I actually started working, then the world of television and movies and jingles and all that stuff came in. I had no issues reading bass parts, or even if they screwed them up, since I came from piano. And if the copyist had made a mistake and wrote my bass parts in treble clef or something, I could read it all.
Right.
But I think what it gave your ears an understanding of sonic possibilities, rather than thinking like bass parts is all going to be 1, 4, 5. It's listening to classical music and listening how the orchestral pieces were constructed, was great. But it's not something where you'd say, well, if you don't do that, you're not going to be a good player.
No, of course, yeah.
It's in the same way that I've been a great reader, but then I read interviews by Pino Palladino, and Pino goes, "I can't read music," and he's one of the best players in the world.
Yeah.
So there's so much more to the equation than just your technical facilities.
Yeah, for sure.
It helped me. If I have to think about it, I would say it certainly helped me.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. But so, how old were you when you started? Oh, can you hear me? I think it cut off a bit.
Yeah. No, there was all coming in, and I just deleted them.
Okay. But so, how old were you when you started this section then? Did you start the section for James Taylor, or you became the section?
Became the section because of James Taylor.
Right.
And so we're probably maybe about 21, something like that, when we were doing that. Because what happened was, the original band with James Taylor, when we did the very first gigs, was Russ Kunkel on drums, myself, Danny Korchmar on guitar, and Carole King playing piano. And during the course of like the first year and a half or so with James, he had encouraged Carole to start doing some of her stuff on stage with us, because she was considered one of the great songwriters when she was like 17 with Jerry Goffin. But nobody knew, they would see records and it would say Goffin and King. Nobody knew who the hell, this was.
Right.
So she's out there playing piano with us. And then James finally got her to get out and do some of her stuff. And the next thing you know, she goes in the studio and records Tapestry. And so suddenly we have a member of our band, the background band, has like the biggest record in the world. Carole had to leave at that point to pursue her own career. And that's when I was doing a project and met Craig Durgee. So I contacted Peter Asher and I said, I think I found the guy to take Carole's place in the group. And what would happen is James was not a big fan of doing sound checks.
Right.
And he would do a line check and split. And then we would just sit and jam. And out of that, people recorded us doing our jams and said, you guys really should think about being a band. And that's how the section formed, was out there. And James was the one who named us.
Right.
We were talking about it, and he said, look, you guys are the rhythm section, so why don't you just call it the section? Yeah. And so Peter got us a record deal with Warner Brothers, and we did 2 albums with them, and then we left Warner's. They had no idea what to do with us.
Right.
I mean, we're one of those bands that historically is like a cult band that like musos, really still talk about it and stuff, but the public, for the most part, has no idea who the hell we were.
Right.
And then we did a thing for Capitol Records, and that didn't really go anywhere. So the hard part was it was such a busy time that every time we got together as a band, it cost us money.
Right.
We were having to turn other work down that was paying work or a tour to go do one of our tours. But I don't regret it for a second. We were the opening act for Mahavishnu Orchestra, and that's how I got to know Billy. Right. And so when he decided to do Spectrum, he called me and asked me if I would do the album with him. And for me, it's one of those albums that it was worth my whole career to be involved in.
Right.
It's just one of those kind of projects where you walk away going, shit, this is pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I was listening to the album the other day, actually. It's really good. It's really cool.
Well, and you think 1973,
exactly,
and that's pretty much first and second takes of everything. We cut the whole album in 2 days.
Yeah, because I read that you really like to just do a few takes, and then you don't want to dig down too deep unless it requires it, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, the first couple of takes, there's the part of your brain at that point that's really free, and you're really expressing yourself. Once you get all the parts in your head and you keep going, it becomes more mechanical. You're in the middle of it rather than closing your eyes and being in the moment. You find yourself just kind of thinking about the physiology of playing and things that. And you may still get a better take at that point, but for me, I'm usually, at least in my own mind, I'm at my best in the very earliest takes. That's where I'm really playing with the most abandon and playing the freest.
Right. And you don't think about the nervousness of playing the wrong note or not knowing what comes next?
No, not really. I mean, if you make a mistake, you make a mistake.
Sure.
I tend... and in those days too, we were cutting, everything was to tape. The only time it would have ever been an issue is if you were doing direct to disc, where you couldn't fix it, but you could always punch in a note or something. But to me, I always tell people when I'm thinking about this, I said, it would be like going to an art museum, and the first thing you do is you walk up 2 inches from a painting and start studying the brush stroke.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than standing back and just digging the painting as a whole, and if it affects you and it draws you in, then you can go look at the technical side of it. And I kind of look at the recording process too like that. I think if I go in and I work on a song and we get a great take and everything's perfect except maybe a couple of notes or a bar or something like that, I would rather go and fix that than recut the whole thing again. To try to make it perfect. And I've told people a lot of times, when you're listening to Spectrum and you're listening to this track Tarian Matador in there where Tommy and Jan Hammer are trading licks back and forth. At one point, Tommy's sitting there, you hear him going, ring, 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 and it's going, ring, ring. He breaks his E string.
Oh, shit, yeah.
So he kept right on playing, played the head, and we never fixed it. It's on the recording of where when he breaks his string, if you know what to listen for. We weren't going to recapture that track because it was so loose. So I always kind of look at I find imperfection can be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is something that's really fascinating with older, the years ago when the records were made that way. And I did a project a few months ago where the band had the same approach, and that was a really good lesson for me as an engineer, because maybe that's a newer generation, but I think we like to make it too perfect, And they was like, no, keep it whatever, wherever it is on the bar, it's after, before, it doesn't matter. And it was really good practice, and that's what I really admire from you guys.
That's great. I mean, it's great that you had that experience with them, because there's certain things about contemporary technology that are really great. There are sides to it, to me, that are anti-productive. I mean, when you sit there, if I'm in the studio with a bad drummer cutting analog, he's a bad drummer. If you're cutting digital, you can quantize them and fix things and move things around. And that guy really shouldn't be playing drums. But by the end of the project, he sounds good. So people go, he's really good. Or pitch correcting singers. I mean, when a singer goes in, put a mic in front of him and sing. You don't sit there, do 20 tracks, comp it, pitch correct it, and all that. So, the beauty of being able to do lots of parts and not have a room with like 60 boxes of 3-inch tape or 2-inch tape, and going through all this and book. It's a double-edged sword when it comes to new technology. And I do love when the opportunity comes. There's been a number of projects in the past couple of years where we've cut to 24 track, at least get the rhythm section on 24 track, and then they can, bounce it over and do vocals and comping and stuff then. But man, when you sit back with big power amps, big speakers and listen to it, man, there's, because I think one of the problems is we have at least one, if not two generations at this point, whose musical experience is earbuds.
Right, exactly.
They've never heard full fidelity music, and every once in a while, like a kid will come in a room where we're doing stuff and they're just like creaming. They're just mesmerized by this sound. And I go, no, that's how we listened every day to this.
Yeah.
Love working with bands, because I never want to talk about the old days.
Right.
I don't want to introduce that discussion, because you sound like grandpa who's an old fart talking about the old days when he was. But if they start asking me about what it was like, then I give them, all kinds of stories about it. And I mean, just it was another time. Music is music in whatever format. When they were cutting Edison wax spools or whatever.
Yeah.
Music is still music, but the processes can be really interesting, and the outcome from them.
Yeah, definitely,
So,
man. There's a lot to be explored in both mediums, to be honest, analog and digital. But I mean, I know you said in some other interviews I heard that you guys did like 4 sessions a day, like 6 days a week. How do you, as a bass player in those situations, well, first of all, how do you approach them? How do you go in, not repeating yourself in each project, I guess?
Well, sometimes you do. There's a finite amount of stuff. I mean, sometimes
Sure.
I keep, kind of like an old Rolodex in my mind of parts where there have been things where you went, oh man, that was, this track feels sort of like that one, and that part worked pretty good on it. So I might drop into that. But for the most part, I've really treated it's like every session I've done has been a song, even if there's 12 songs on the session. And I really like to respond to the individual tune. And it can almost be infinite at that point. So when we would be doing, like these ferocious schedules of recording, and you'd be doing like a country artist, then you'd roll across a hall to another studio, and it might be a TV show. And then the next thing you know, you got an R&B date. You have to be a chameleon. You put on a different hat for every gig, but you're drawing from the same life experience and facilities that you have. So I think more than anything during that period, it was just really, you'd go in and listen to the song and let the song dictate to you what it needed. I've always felt the thing that's not good is when guys go in and they sort of impose themselves on a song. I mean, it's not about you. You've been hired to do a job, and you go in there And if the song requires me just sitting there playing whole notes and half notes, I'm totally content with that, because I could do a half-hour dissertation on how to play whole notes and half notes, because it's not just as easy as plucking a note. There's a lot that comes into play. Or, if you're doing a Billy Cobham or a fusion project or a metal project, and it's all, each one is an individual, but the basic parts and facility is kind of the same for all of it. So you just do it. But I've never
That's right.
I've one more ring maybe, and then now they'll be gone. I'm sorry about that. It's one of those things that I really never intellectualize my playing.
Right.
To me, it's really kind of like a visceral gut thing rather than intellectual. So when a song starts, I've never played a song twice the same, unless I specifically know I'm going to have to play it again, or I'm going to have to double the part with a piccolo or something else. Right. Then I have to be very cognizant of the part I'm playing. But for the most part, if somebody said to me, "Oh, that's great, let's do it again, just like that," I mean, just like that, I go, I don't know if I could. I mean, I could get 90% there, but there's going to be nuances in every take that are going to be slightly different. So, to me, there's a lot of spontaneity in all of this. Right. And the minute that red light turns on and that count off happens, you really, for me, enter another space completely. Right. And I immerse myself in that performance and that song at that moment. And by the next day, or even the next session, I'm there and somebody says, "What did you guys just do?" And you're kind of going, I don't remember. Oh, yeah. It's literally, it's like you almost, it's like setting a box of tape on a giant magnet and just degaussing everything. That's kind of what happens. It's almost like a safety net, because somebody did like a forensic study of me and sent me some information, but they said, they estimated I'd played on somewhere around 26,000 songs. Wow. Yeah. And each one of those had to be addressed as an individual song. Mm-hmm. So you really have to kind of like clear house. Yeah.
But like when you did start out, I mean, obviously, because you got more and more popular and people trusted you in the studio, how did you set yourself up for the success of being able to deliver when being called upon, so to speak?
Well, I was fortunate on many levels that the first person I really got to start with was James Taylor. Right. So it's kind of like, where do you go from there mentality? I mean, he was at the pinnacle of this new movement. And he was like the poster boy for the California singer-songwriter movement. And it was such a profound education with him because, first off, because of his style of playing, his guitar playing, he's playing bass in all of his guitar parts. So it really required me to think of bass in a very different way than I had been coming out of rock bands at that point. But we were kind of like thrown right into the middle of this with no training. The first time I was in the studio was probably the first time I ever plugged into a direct box. Yeah. I really didn't know this stuff. So we were kind of learning on the gig. But I was, I'm a real type A personality. So I was kind of like studying it all as it was going down so that when I started getting called for other work, I went in with, enough knowledge to go in and do it. But I've always been, it's funny. I have like probably so many people, I have a real heavy blend of confidence and insecurity in what I do. So on the one hand, like I'd be driving to a session, just thinking to myself, God, just don't suck. Please do good today. Don't suck. Go in there and the song would come up and you just jump on it. And then they'd walk out going, man, this is unbelievable what you did on it. Right. It's a real mixture of emotions when you do this, but
would you write it down? Like, would you chart it out?
Well, it's different every session. Sometimes especially the early stuff like the James and Jackson Brown and all those people, there was no charts or anything. We would sit down and they would take out their guitar and play it, and we would just listen to them and figure it out. You might end up sketching a couple of things if there was something complicated, but for the most part. And then as time went on, I would do sessions that were fully charted, and they wanted note for note exactly, what they had charted. No charts, chord charts. I would go to Nashville, had to learn the number system.
Right.
I mean, there's so many different kind of permutations of things, and once again, to me, every aspect of what I do, my instrument choice, maybe potentially pedal choice, is always predicated on the song, not the project. It's that song. And like when I worked on one of Steve Lukather's solo albums, and we had one song called "Jammin' with Jesus," and I thought the bass needs to be like as distorted and horrible sounding as possible. And for the whole record, I've got this beautiful clean bass, and on that track, we plugged it into a box and just fucked it up as much as we could, and it was the perfect thing for that song. I could never have used it on any other song on the record, but for that one song. So it really does always come down to an individual song and how you respond to it. And sometimes I'll hear something and I'll go, man, I'm just praying I can get through this. They're so complicated and so involved and really so not what I normally do. But you've committed to it, so you figure it out. I was going through some pictures yesterday, and I photographed a score. There was a movie, Harrison Ford movie called Hollywood Homicide, right. And the guy who wrote the score on it, he had this one big chase scene, and there was this cue, and he had programmed all of the bass stuff on this, and the bass was like the driving force on this. And when guys are doing it on a keyboard, they can sit there, they can speed it up, they can do all these things to it. I sat there, and everybody took a lunch break, and I sat and worked for like an hour and a half on this part, trying to get through it. And finally, when they came back from lunch, we recorded it. And I told him, I said, "You've got to sign this for me." And then he wrote, Leland, he says, "I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And I saved it because the part is just insane, because it was really not a bass part. It's a left-hand keyboard part, but they wanted bass on it. I went through total hell. And there was another bass player playing upright on the date named Kenny Wilde, who's really one of the best bass players in LA. And when he was leaving for lunch, he said, "Glad it's you."
Yeah.
So it's just don't know, but you get everything thrown at you. And that's the life of studio work is, get rid of this, is studio work is I would say probably 85% of every session I've done, I had no idea what it was going to be until I got to the session.
Right.
You don't receive music in advance normally and have any preparatory time. Yet the difficult part of the gig to me is, unlike so many other jobs in the world, you can't not do it that day. It's like there's, if a guy was coming here to spend a few days, plumbing your house, and he suddenly didn't feel good, he'd say, "Well, look, I'm going to go home now. I'll be back tomorrow." You go in the studio and you got 3 hours or 4 hours to cut a track, and you can't leave at the end of the day without cutting the track. So exactly. There's a stress level to it that most people have no clue what it is. But I've always told guys, like in clinics and stuff, I said, when you get a call for work, you have two options. You can say yes or no. And if you say yes, there's a lot of obligation that comes with that yes. And you can't be, blasé about it. You come in fully professional, prepared, and you do the best job you can. Because it may be that person's only shot at recording a song in their life. And for you, you're leaving there and going to another session. It's not going to affect me in the long run. But when you're in there for that moment, that's the most important gig you have. And you do it the best you possibly can.
Exactly. Totally, man. I completely agree. But so when you talk about the song, like that the song is always the most important thing. What is it in the song that you're listening for specifically? Is it the vocals or is it the lyrics or?
Generally, I mean, I'll listen through, and kind of check out the lyrics. I'm not as much of a lyric person as I am like a track person. So it's nice to know whether or not the song, I mean, if you're hearing a kind of a track and you're coming up with like a happy bass part, then you find out it's a song about suicide or something. you, you have to have some clue as to what the song's about. But for the most part, I try to listen to things as a whole and just get a feel for, where, the kind of the ebb and flow of the song, where you're going to dig in deeper, or if the bridge is the kind of a bridge where you really want to release, or if you want that to be the most intense part of the song. It's like, again, we're dealing with individual songs, so you're grabbing whatever in that song, captivates you. And there's times where you sit and listen to songs and you just go, this is complete shit. It's an awful song and the person can't sing it, but you give it your best shot, and that's all you can do. And sometimes I've done projects like that and it turns into a hit record, and I'm like in total. And other projects I've worked on that I thought were some of the best stuff I've ever been involved with, and they never even got released. Nobody ever heard them. They're still sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the number of things that can go on within the process as a whole, from inception to completion, is like infinite. Yeah. And so, it's I hate to defer to the old days, but there were a lot of projects we worked on where we followed through, even though we only did basic tracks. We would come down to mastering, and just wanted to really, if there was any tweaking to be done, wanted to hear what they were going to do. And there was, and the beauty of doing, records, LPs, would to be sitting there at a cutting lathe, and you hear that song play, and when that song ends, we would all sit there and just go for like the next track to begin, because sometimes you and butted right up. Sometimes you want space for
yeah.
And it was almost like the process to me. I always kind of look at it as like a real Japanese tea ceremony. I mean, they're just a cup of tea, but the ceremony to get you that cup of tea is really deep. And to me, you could just put a lacquer on and just cut the straight side, but when you really start thinking about nuances and placement of songs, and how do you want the side A to end emotionally, and how do you want when they take the moment and clean the record and flip it over, and how does side, there were so many considerations that were going into these, because most album projects were kind of complete stories as compared to when it went to CDs and suddenly everybody could hit random and only play the songs that they like on it. And then now people are just streaming individual, or they're cutting EPs and stuff. The whole process is so dramatically different. And I've always been cognizant of change. So I've never wanted to find myself in a position of being, like I said, being the old fart and lamenting that we're not living in the past. Because I love working, and I'm thrilled to be in a band that's got a single coming out today. We've got great press in the Rolling Stone and AAA radios. All this stuff's going on, and to me, I'm in a band with guys I've been playing with for 50 years, and this is so we're still in a forward direction. I don't dwell very much on my history in this, because it's all. I mean, you go to All Music or any of those sites, and you can go through a partial discography there. I mean, none of that stuff's complete. There's the thing on it's probably about half or so of what I've worked on, because sometimes I've gone to check things out and I go, God, they didn't even get that, or they list like a person like Clint Black or Reba McEntire, and they list an album, and you go, look, I did like 5 albums with these people, but they use so. I don't really think about that. My real concern is, at this point in my life, to still feel viable, and still contributing. And I love it every day. I feel really, really so fortunate and if you want to call it blessed that whatever I do has managed to stand the test of time.
Exactly.
Stylistically and all that. I mean, I still work with artists that are 20 years old.
Right.
And the minute we walk to the studio, we're all on the same playing field.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, man. That's what you got to do as well,
Yeah.
For sure. But you mentioned the importance of whole notes or half notes.
Yeah.
That sounds that's a really interesting topic, to be honest. Can you just maybe expand what you mean? Like, what can you create? Or maybe the question should be, are people undervaluing a whole note?
Well, here, let me hold on just a sec. Let me plug in.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I'll see what the hell my cable is down here. And it's just getting through this YouTube for the day. So
Yeah.
this is my old Frankenstein bass. This is the bass I've used on almost 85% of everything I've ever recorded. We built this bass in '73.
Wow.
But you would have options like, if you were going to play just an A, and if you're going to go, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, let me. I could finger the A on the E string, or I could play it as an open A. I mean, it's a different thing. Now, if I was playing and I was going to go to a D from that A to a D, I could go, or I could finger it and go. I mean, it's like the amount of stuff. Are you going to go?
Right.
Are you going to go? Or are you going to? And on each song, that A, that octave, how's that? Or
Exactly.
are you going to put a little vibrato? Are you going to?
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, it's kind of infinite, the amount of things you could even do it as just, as a harmonic. So, I mean, to me, it's with all of these things, like when I'm doing country projects, it could just be, or just, or at that point, I might say, well, this thing really should sound more like like a P bass, and so I keep little pieces of foam rubber.
Right.
And if I put that in between the strings, suddenly I've got.
Yeah.
So, there's all these little, ideas and tricks, but once again, they are all predicated on that song, that specific song, and what are you going to do? And I've always, one of the things people have always talked about with me and with my playing, it's like a tonal thing, and really just being able to milk these notes, and kind of find the right definition for each note.
Yeah.
And it's something that I ever, if somebody's people are talking to me about these performances that I'm doing on my YouTube channel, and they're starting to talk to me about things they're watching, like the way my hands are going. And I have no clue what the hell they're talking about until I go back and look at the video, because I'm in a different headspace. I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. And they're going, oh, I love the angle of the way you're doing that and how you're, and I, what the fuck are you talking about? And then I go back and watch, and I suddenly see what they're talking about. And it's something that to me was completely subconscious. It wasn't anything I was, thinking on this song, I'm going to do this. I'm at that moment to that song.
Right.
And that's what I did. So I leave it up to others to let me know what I'm doing, kind of thing.
I mean, it's super fascinating to be honest. I mean, there's so much you could do with just a few notes, and like you just showed us, there's so many variations in one note. So it's very cool.
Then and then you get into the stuff that's like the Cobham stuff or some of Phil's stuff, like showing the Ssudio bass part and stuff, just relentlessly. repetitive and not easy. It's a tough one because the original track was a synth track. And so, I mean, you accommodate these things and you kind of develop them as you're going along. But I think that's one of the things that, people have asked me. They said, man, like, over 50 years doing this, how do you keep it, interesting for yourself? And how do you not?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I find it, every day, like in doing this website, I'm going through all these artists like Carla Bonoff, who I'd recorded with, and Paul Williams, all these people back in the day. And then I was posting like, Vanessa Carlton and people like that. It's like each of these has unique demands. And that's what I find exciting. I love being thrown into a situation where I have to, oh God, what can I do here? Kind of thing. And you have to dig deep to find it. And sometimes you might say, geez, that sounds familiar. And then you realize it's kind of a part you did on something else. Or the way people come up to me sometimes if they hear Stratus and they go, oh man, Massive Attack. You got that from Massive Attack? I go, no, Massive Attack's that from our recording. That's me track, and stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's crazy. But, I just feel really fortunate. Because I was like, like when this all really started, I was about 20 and then I just turned 73.
Yeah.
And you just kind of go, who in their right mind would have ever thought, guys, like who would think you'd be out there, seeing Mick Jagger and Keith Richards at this point in their lives, or McCartney, or these people, I mean, it's like there's an element of this that's somewhere between being, Peter Pan and the Fountain of Youth.
Right.
You might look older, but I'm getting ready. I'm going to post. I'm having to shed a little bit of it. There's one of Phil's songs, "Hand in Hand," is really a handful of a bass part.
Right.
And the performance that's on YouTube was from our 1985 show.
Right.
And so I'm trying to reteach myself that, and I'm kind of sitting here laughing, watching me in 1985. Figuring out the part now with the same bass that I'm playing. That bass I just showed you is the bass I was using on that tour, and it's just like a kind of mind melt when you're really at it. You're just kind of going, man, weird journey.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can only imagine, to be honest. But obviously, you've had as you just said, a long career. Is there any moments where that sticks out as moments where you thought, damn, I can't believe I'm doing this?
Oh, God, I mean, maybe not in sort of a shocking way, but certainly in one of those ways, like especially some of the really big tours that we did, like when you're sitting there, a stadium with, 80, 100,000 people in it and stuff, and you just kind of go, holy crap, this is amazing. Or I find myself many times in the studio because at the end of the day, I'm still a fan. And so I'd be sitting in the studio and I put on my headphones and I'm listening in the next room to Joe Cocker singing, or Barbara Streisand, or, people like that. And I just kind of, I'm fascinated because in my mind of minds, I'm still like this kind of a dorky kid who grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And if I'm in some place and like Robert Plant's there or Clapton and they go, hey, Lee, man, how you doing?
Yeah.
I go, why do you know me? Why would they know me? Kind of thing. I'm still sitting there kind of freaking out over that. And it's just strange, how these things come together. But there's been, to me on Phil Collins's tours, every time we'd play In the Air Tonight for me is special.
Right.
Just the tension in the room, watching that audience waiting for the drum fill and like all these hands going up, doing the fill. It's one of those things you get goosebumps every time from the stage, and I feel really fortunate that I've been able to be a participant in some pretty remarkable touring experiences. Like when I was on the road with Lyle Lovett and his large band, I mean, we're sitting there, and there's 16 guys on stage who are monsters. And when that thing would start cranking, it was like a freight train, and you're sitting in the middle of this is going, this is so fucking cool. You're kind of distancing yourself, and you suddenly become an audience, and rather than one of the things the audience is enjoying, you're more in their headspace and looking around the stage and appreciating like all the talent that's up there, and not even thinking of you as being an integral part of that.
Right.
So it's a trip. I feel completely fortunate that I've been able to sustain through all these years. That I've got some hand injuries, but for the most part, I'm not dealing with arthritis or anything like that. So I haven't had anything that's taken away my ability. This is where I know a lot of people in the business, because of physical issues, just finally had to quit. I can't imagine that. I think it would be like kiss of death to not be able to participate.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Has been any moments where, if you look at the other side of the coin, where you thought, can I really keep doing this? Is this for me? Or that was never something you considered?
No, not really. I've never considered that. There were periods where, like in the 80s, when synths came on the scene, and it was, most of the real live players were starting to suffer for the fact that, like, we would do these big orchestral dates, and suddenly there were three guys with synths, Synclav and something else, and and you would just go, Jesus, this has got to be so hard for so many people. And there was a lot of synth bass going on, but it went for a while like that. But the fortunate part for me, compared to a lot of guys in LA, because I always mixed recording and touring. I tried to do both all the time. And there were a lot of guys who I knew that were, when the studios were really busy, they would say, how can you go on the road, man? Somebody's going to take your gig here, in the studio. And I'd go, I don't care. I like playing live. To me, live is so much more exhilarating than the studio.
Sure, yeah.
But I love both. But I treated it very professionally. Like when I knew a tour was coming up, there was a pretty good block of producers who I normally would work with, and I would call them all and say, look, I'm hitting the road. I'm going to be leaving at such and such time, and I will be back at such and such time. And about 2 weeks before I'd be coming back, I'd call them and remind them that I'm coming back. And sometimes I would go right from the airport to the studio. They would have a project going on and say, no, we'll wait for you or something, or they would push it before I go. And then as time went on, I was able to use the studio during these really kind of crappy times of the record. I always use the road while the studios guys were suffering because of synth and all that. And then suddenly these guys would be calling me going, man, if you hear of any tours, and I'd go, the real problem is the guys who are touring already have the gig.
Yeah, exactly.
Their job because you suddenly have decided to make yourself available. So I was fortunate that I really did cultivate both sides of this. So when one slowed down, I would just immediately jump into the other. And so I never really took time. I've never taken time off. The first time I've really honestly taken off is this year since the pandemic.
Right, yeah.
On the road every year since 1970 on some level or not. This year we did a cruise in February, a rock and roll cruise with Roger Daltrey and Nancy Wilson from Heart, and so, and right after that cruise is when everything shut down. So that for us was the last opportunity to get out and play live. But it's surreal to me. To be home this much. I'm so used to being on the road, and and we're all sitting here just going, we're not sure when. We're going to do a live stream on the 23rd with our band from a place called the Coach House down here.
Right.
And they're all set up with 5 stationary cameras, and then we're going to have a handheld and a guy mixing, and there'll be no audience, and it's a big stage. We're going to put that out. Cool. But and then there's another place called the Libero Theater up in Santa Barbara that I think we're going to try to do the same thing there. And we just want to play, and we're so excited. Like there's a movie being made about us by the Denny Tedesco, who's made the Wrecking Crew movie, and there's a movie about us now. and we're halfway through it, and then everything's kind of on hold, waiting to see, how we can get crews together and all
So is
this.
that
It's very surreal. We're just all dealing with circumstances that have never existed
exactly?
before.
I mean,
So
you were telling me, I don't think we got that on tape, so to speak. But you were telling me that you are releasing a new album too, right?
yeah.
And that's with.
Yeah. So what we have is we have a band called the Immediate Family,
Mhm.
and it started when Danny Korchmar, Cooch, got a Japanese record deal, and when he went into Jackson Browne gave him his studio to do his album in, and Danny called myself and Russ Kunkel and Waddy Wachtel, and Danny had started working with another friend of ours, Steve Postel, and he asked us all to do his record. So we did the record, and he ended up naming it Danny Korchmar and the Immediate Family because we've been together a half a century. We're really like an immediate family.
Right.
And it had really good success in Japan. It was never released here. And then we got ourselves a record deal with a label in the States called Quarto Valley Records. And we've done a new album, and the single, like I said, came out today from the album, and we're probably going to release another single, and the video came out today for the single.
Cool.
And release another probably down the way just a little bit, and we're kind of waiting to see. But the album is going to be coming out in Japan first.
Okay.
And then it's going to be coming out here in the States on Quarto Valley later in the year or the beginning of next year, depending on how things are going. And if we finish the documentary film, then they'll try to align everything together. So there's a lot going on, but a lot that we can't act on.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, the record is great. I mean, from my standpoint of just, I, as a listener, would love this record, and the guys have written great songs, and the performances are all really great, and it's fun because of the history that we have together. There's a thing that happens, it's like listening to like a singing group of siblings,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were little kids, and their metabolism lines up. I mean, they breathe together, and it becomes this whole other thing rather than putting together 5 separate individuals. And with these guys, when I played with Russ Kunkel, I've known Russ Kunkel as a drummer since '68. And we've done tours every year together. We've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of records together. So, I mean, we don't even have to be in the same room, and we can be listening to a click track and have some kind of a guide in front of us and go in and listen to the track, and we'll nail everything together without hearing each other.
Yeah.
I mean,
Awesome.
thing. And Waddy and Cooch and Steve and Postel just really are all singing their asses off, and there's no keyboards, and it's 3 guitars, bass, and drums.
Cool.
And a great time. So we'll see what where it all leads to. But I just talked to one of our managers this morning, and he said that the launch that hit today is going crazy.
Nice.
For the video and for the first single. And like you said, this weekend, the big drive really starts with it. And I'm going to talk about it on my YouTube video. And
Awesome.
so, there's, if this pandemic hadn't hit, there was a lot going on. We would have already been to Japan and stuff here. And we had a bunch of gigs lined up that are sitting on hold. And the thing that was great was the cruise that we did. They said on those cruises, what they do is they have like a dozen bands or something on the cruise. And then they wait like a couple of years before they're invited back because they want to change it up every year. And the guy who was running the cruise, he said, first off, people came on and they just saw the name Immediate Family, had no idea. I mean, we were a last minute addition to this cruise. They had no idea who the hell we were. Then they came and saw us and saw the gig. And I had people writing to me immediately going, "You're like the best thing on this cruise. You guys are amazing." And the guy who's puts on the cruises contacted us, and he said, "I'd love you guys to come back next year. The demand was really high for you."
Awesome.
So I mean, there's an energy going on. It's that, I mean, we all look at each other and we're just laughing, going, "Man, everybody's practically," other than Steve's, like the youngster, he's probably Steve's probably in his 60s, but the rest of us are all in our 70s. And man, all these people are like knocking down the door.
Yeah, it's cool.
But you never say no. You never turn your back on anything. You just don't know what's going to happen. And you can, and this business, like so much of life, is always that kind of thing. And you can hit a low ebb in it and think it's over and quit. Mm-hmm. You know, disappointment is like a great leveler in the music business, where a lot of people can't take that. And inevitably, there's going to be disappointment. So, you know, you have to be, it's like, I guess, investing in the stock market. You have to be in for a long ride.
Exactly.
And you do okay, but there may be times where you're tanking and you're just going, oh, Jesus, it's all over. But if you wait it out, then all of a sudden things might swing back and suddenly you're cool again. So I kind of look at the music business that way. You know, it's like you don't, you know, in a way I also used to tell like a lot of younger players that were getting into it. I said, the thing you do is you don't predicate your income by the individual gig. You have to really look at it as an annual job.
Yeah, exactly.
And if at the end of the year you've paid all your bills, you could put a little money away, then you're successful at it. You might have a month where you look in your book and there's nothing, and you're freaking out at that point. And then suddenly the next month, a whole bunch. And sometimes you get a month where there's nothing, and the next month you could have worked 2 months because there was so much work and you had to turn it down.
Exactly. I mean, that is the most tricky thing with being in the music industry. I've experienced it many times. I will experience it going forward. But yeah, so how do you stay calm in those moments? Like, what's your experience of just riding that wave out, so to speak?
Well, first off, I've been smart enough where when I'm really working and all that, I don't live extravagantly.
Right.
So that I can afford a low ebb and things, and I'm not looking like, you know, losing my house or you know, being on the streets or something like that. But I also just have other interests. So like if this isn't working at a moment, I've got other things, even if it's just working in my garden, you know, just keep your mind active. And when the pandemic hit, like I said, I looked at a really busy book suddenly was empty.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so I started thinking about things, and the reason I started the whole YouTube thing, I really didn't start a channel. It just became a channel, was there's so many times where people have written to me from like, they've been to like a Phil Collins concert, but it was in a stadium, and they're going, man, I could hear you, but I really couldn't hear all the details because, you know, the place was so big. And I thought, well, I had our front of house mixer send me a board mix of a show we did in Adelaide, Australia. And so what I did was I've got a little Bose speaker next to my computer, and I play that track, and then I've got my amp that I just played through to show you that. And I thought I'll just play the show every day. I'll do a song in order, and this way I can feature the bass part. It's not the way I would ever want to record because I hate the bass as loud as it is. I want to be tucked in the mix, but it's one of these things. I put that up, and it suddenly took on a life of its own. And then I started telling stories about stuff, and all of a sudden, all these people are writing to me going, "Man, you're the calm in my storm. You're the this and that." Yeah. I'd read these comments, and it's kind of life affirming in certain ways, and once I got to the end of Phil's set, basically, I started thinking about other Phil's songs because there's a lot of other stuff in Genesis. And then I started thinking about all these other people like Vince Gill and Strice, Diana Ross and all this. Because if I look through my disc, the hard part is every day I have to go back and think about a song I might have done 30 some years ago and trying to remember it. So I've kind of dug in deep here. I've committed myself to a pretty big project.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have the time for it.
Yeah, I mean, coming off of Phil's tour was easy because we had just done it. I mean, I could play that show in my sleep.
Right.
But picking up a song I recorded, you know, in 1974, and I'm trying to go, how did that go? And, you know, and I've got other things going, so I'm not going to sit here all day trying to do it. So I've kind of picked, and some of the songs are more complicated, and they were production pieces. Like, so what and people have accepted it, that they don't mind me just talking about it and then playing the track to them, not playing along with it. So I'm learning while I'm going along as to what other people want to have. And some of them are getting nuts. I mean, they're going, I'd love to hear you do some like Rush and Yes songs and stuff. I go, I don't play like Geddy. I don't play like Chris Squire. I said, I'm not going there. I said, to sit with you and listen to the stuff. But, those guys are unique players unto themselves. And I would just sound like a lame bass player trying to be like them. I do what I do. So I'm trying to set some parameters and rules, but it's been a great way during a down period to really do things. And I've never recorded at home, and I just got sent an SSL audio interface. Nice. And I just did 2 tracks, one for us and one for a friend of mine on it. So I'm learning that I don't need anything GarageBand because I'm just doing bass parts. I'm not doing like track or anything like that, but it's the first time in my whole career where I've actually recorded bass parts at home. I've been amazingly lazy about it, where I've had people for 20 years saying, "Can we send you files and put bass on our album?" And they're from Sweden or from Pakistan or Japan or whatever. And I've just been, I find other things I like doing. So I kind of never wanted home to be become a recording scene. But it's cool. I'm getting to the point after a few days with it where I kind of get how to use it all. Nice. And the 2 tracks I sent out, they wrote back and they said that SSL unit sounds amazing.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it.
Yeah,
I haven't tried it myself, but yeah, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I did. They sent me the big one. It's a 2-channel. I could have really gone with the 1-channel because I'm just doing bass, so I really didn't. But it's it's one more ring.
Yep.
Goodbye. So it's one of these things. It's kind of nice just to have something new to think about that kind of picks your brain and makes you think a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad people can hire you from your home.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's really good. Well, Lee, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Maybe before we quit this conversation, could you let people know where they can find more info about you, or how they can hire you, or whatever you have coming up?
It's easy to private message me on my Facebook page. If I'm not kicked off, which I'm always being kicked off of Facebook.
Oh yeah.
They usually block me about 100 some days a year on Facebook because I rant a lot politically.
Oh shit! I didn't know that actually.
No, I despise the administration, and I don't mince words when I talk about them. And the next thing I know, I get the trolls that come in and get me thrown off. But private message me there. I don't have a website, but if somebody wanted to write to me, they could also. I would love it if they would join my YouTube page and subscribe to it. I mean, that doesn't cost anything. Just come in and hit subscribe. But I've got almost 100 videos on it now, and they could come there.
Well, Lee, it was a pleasure. Thanks for taking your time. I know you're a busy man.
Anytime. If you have anything ever comes up and you want to talk about anything else, or there's a specific subject or anything like that you want to focus on, don't hesitate to contact me.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No, it'd be great. But thank you. It was great talking to you.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Lee. It was awesome talking to you, and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Again, check out the links in the description below. Don't forget to join the email list where you can get exclusive access to interviews, up-and-coming interviews, and opportunities to ask questions to up-and-coming guests, and much more. But again, real pleasure talking to Lee, and I hope you liked it. Also, before you leave, please subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions of guests you'd like to see on the show, let me know in the comments or hit me with an email. But that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you guys very soon.